This video depicts strong violence and sexual content. Viewer discretion is advised.
Are you gonna lay there, swallow that blood in your mouth? Or are you gonna stand up, spit it out, and go spill theirs?
Hello everybody, it's the Brewmaster here. If this is your first time to the channel, then welcome. And to you over 8,000 absolute hellraisers out there, hey, it's great to see you again. Combat is one of the most exciting parts of action games, as is evidenced by the sheer number of games that focus on combat as a core mechanic. But how do we ratchet up the tension at our own tables, especially when we're playing a system like 5e, which is basically notorious for being slow, and I'd even say boring? Well, today we're going to be taking notes from the king of action spectacle, Hardcore Henry. Now, Hardcore Henry isn't a deep film at all, but it does set a benchmark in action films and features some of the most mind-blowing, high-octane action that you'll find in any film outside of The Raid and John Wick. And today we're going to be talking about how to bring this level of pulse-pounding action to our games, and the first step is... Whew, I'm bent up in kind of a pretzel over here, so this is going to be a challenge. Anyway, first person. When we watch Hardcore Henry, instantly the most notable thing that you're going to see is its camera's perspective. And this is perhaps one of the biggest lessons that we can take from this film, because most GMs, they're going to be narrating in a sort of omnipotent kind of point of view, which can work in situations where there's a strong need for clarity and where that takes precedence. But combat will feel much more exciting if you just simply give into the chaos of battle. If you've never been in a fight, then I'll tell you, when you're fighting someone, you get tunnel vision. And that doesn't mean you can't see what's going on around you. It just means that you're very focused on where the immediate source of danger is coming from. Which means is if someone's really on top of your ass, man, you're just not gonna have time to look around and absorb everything that's happening around you. And so when we use this first person perspective, just listen closely. I'm gonna give you an example of the omnipotent style that most GMs use versus what a first person style would sound like, and you're gonna see how dynamic it is. So omnipotent view would sound something like this.
Okay, 3 goblins pop out of the bushes, roll initiative.
Goblins.
Yeah, and they also surprise you because they definitely beat your passive perception. So yeah, this first guy is gonna go first, moves up. And so yeah, the goblins are covered like in bones and leathers, and you can see that. And that's going to be what's your armor class?
18.
Are you behind cover?
They're just goblins, so I guess.
Okay. And so that's gonna be a miss. The other one's gonna move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares, and that's a hit. That's a hit, and that's gonna be 5 points of damage. And come on, goblin, and that's a natural one. Actually, that's a critical miss. Okay, it's your turn. What do you do?
And if you've ever watched people play at a table that sounds like that, it is almost painful to watch, and it's almost painful to play. However, when we shift from that sort of omnipotent point of view to a first-person view, you can see how dynamic of a situation that you're in, and that's going to look something like this at the table. Roll initiative.
Initiative? Wait. I don't... Are there any...
All you see is 3 heads pop up. You think they might be goblins because of the height. They're green. That's all you know.
So it might not be goblins?
And you're utterly surprised by them.
My passive perception is a 21.
Are you in cover?
I mean, I'm always in cover. I'm super... Like, when I walk, everywhere I go, I'm always looking for danger.
Okay, as soon as you see these gnarled, knobby green heads, they pop up and surprise you, your reflexes take over, and you just instantly dive behind the nearest cover that you can find, and you don't know what's happening as you hunker down.
Oh, shit.
You just hear little feet scrambling, plants rustling, the shouts and calls of this weird native language, this banter, the zips and zings and thuds of multiple arrows hitting and ricocheting off the rotted log that you just dove behind. But a biting pain tugs at your side. You realize you're bleeding, grazed for 5 points of damage.
How many are there?
What do you do?
It's my turn? Wait.
Yes, it's your turn. What do you do? And you can already see how that sounds so much more different. And so one of the methods that I like to use when using first person, just to sort of smooth it out and to lessen the amount of chop, is to roll all my rolls at once and then summarize the results of all of my rolls, as opposed to telling the players piece by piece what's happening as I'm rolling for each turn. That's just going to reduce the amount of chop, which is going to make the game feel much smoother. Even if the turn itself doesn't take less time, the fact that they're just getting all the information at once is going to make the combat feel that much faster too. You only want to summarize your roles from the perspective of that character. This is going to actually be great as a game master, because it's going to allow you to literally have less description. Like, you don't have to talk as much when you're doing this, because your player can only, their character can only see so much. So it allows you to get away with more sparse descriptions, while also adding to that sense of chaos, that sense of uncertainty in battle, which is going to make the game feel much more hardcore. Because the real power behind this, or the real reason why we want to do this first person perspective, is because knowledge is power, and power is safety. But combat should never feel safe if your game is going to feel hardcore. So give into that chaos of battle. Don't give your players so much information about the enemy. Don't give them the exact position. Don't give them the exact numbers. They can't 100% verify those things, then don't tell them. I wouldn't even give the monsters a real name to refer to them by. Just whatever your players think of, that's what they're called. Because these facts start to give the players information, starts to give them power in that situation. But combat, again, is going to feel much more hardcore if it's hectic and a little bit mysterious even. And even if the PCs can verify, enemy position, enemy numbers, I still use open language. How many goblins are there? You see 3 goblins is what I would say. Well, are there more? Then my question is going to be, how could you know? Because this is going to give the players the opportunity to actually come up with some sort of narrative reason why their character could and would know, which is a little bit of role play, and then that could be fun. Or they'll reach the conclusion that there is no way for their character to know that information, and then they're going to have to decide whether or not they want to engage with the goblins, not knowing whether or not there's going to be 20 more of them in the bush. This also insulates you as the GM, because if you say that there's only 3 goblins and then later you decide to have more show up, that's going to feel contrived. And so this sort of open language allows you to add enemies without it feeling artificial. Keeping information limited also simulates the short amount of time window that a combat round is supposed to represent. I mean, combat round is only 6 seconds. I mean, you're playing Cyberpunk, it's 3 seconds. So how much information is the player absorbing really in that amount of time? They're only going to know what they're looking at, what they're focusing on. And if the players want more information, they feel like they need more information than I initially give them, then I allow them to spend their action to make any skill check that makes sense, to observe the environment, to search the environment, and try to sort of ping their enemies or sort of get an exact bead on where they are. And I found that under pressure, a lot of players will actually just forego this option, because spending your whole turn, spending your whole action, that's a valuable resource. And they might decide, no, I don't have time to sit here trying to figure out where everybody is. I just need to go into action. And again, that's going to make the situation that much more high octane and that much more hardcore. And it's not to say that if you use an omnipotent view that you're a bad game master, or that, somehow you suck, or this is not to put anybody down, but it is to say that if you switch into first person, you'll find your narration becoming that much more dynamic, and it's going to kick it up a notch. But now that we understand the importance and the significance of using a first person camera perspective, it's not going to do us any good unless we make that camera move. Having a hardcore game is all about movement, constant movement. And I'm not talking about how many squares you move, but I'm talking about the scene that is playing out, extending outside of the confines that original conflict started in. So for instance, in one of my Waterdeep campaigns, I had a player sneak into a warehouse that was owned by some drug dealers, right? They go in, they investigate. While they're in there, a firefight breaks out. This is a chemistry lab, so the firefight results in a little explosion, causes a fire. The building starts to burn down. In order to escape, the player has to jump out of the 2nd-story window onto a passing wagon in order to get away from the blaze. Unfortunately, some of the bad guys get out of the fire too. They instantly go run to their own horses to give chase. Now the player has to literally jump down onto the wagon, Grand Theft Auto style, throw the driver off into the street, and hijack the wagon to try to get away. This led to a high-speed chase with both parties shooting at each other, destroying infrastructure, running over shops, causing civilians to dive all over the place trying to get out of the way, and eventually ended in a head-on collision. The player just rolled a nat 1 on their check, crashed the wagon. killed the donkeys on impact, threw the other driver out of his car and onto the pavement, killing him, caused a huge car collision, a huge pileup, which led to an explosion, which the player was able to barely escape, and then used that explosion and the chaos from it to escape into the crowd as the cops approached from the distance. So what started as the character just getting a little bit curious and wanting to go snoop around in the warehouse led to a fight that led to a high-speed chase that led to an explosion and took them all throughout the city while being contained to what is technically the same scene. Like, it was all the same scene, the same action, the same combat, but it provided over an hour of content and an experience that player still talks about to this day. Because a fight is going to feel big, it's going to feel epic when it literally can't be contained to one spot. Even if your party's simply fighting Red Brand ruffians, that fight starts in a living room and then they crash through the back door and they're fighting on the patio, then they crash through the balcony and now they're fighting in the driveway, and then those people jump in cars and they start shooting and running away. Yeah, that's gonna lead to an experience that your players are never gonna forget, even though they were just fighting like, you know, CR1 creatures. That is hardcore. That is a heart-pumping scene that, like, literally just no player is ever gonna forget. Note, however, with this method, if you are a map-heavy DM, then this is going to be the best time to strengthen your theater of the mind, because you'll notice that if you're switching so many locations in the same scene, if you solely rely on maps, then you're going to have a hard time, a hell of a time finding maps to cover every area that your players might go. Also, you're going to have to predetermine areas where the fight can go, which means that if the fight doesn't go there, then you sort of wasted your time preparing that map. So while it's not impossible to use maps with this method, I have found with, you know, time and experience that it almost never pays off to limit yourself to just maps. When with Theater of the Mind, you can literally take your players wherever they want to go or wherever you need them to be. Also, when it comes to Theater of the Mind, it allows you to very much tailor make every scene to fit the mood that you're going for. Because when it's Theater of the Mind, nothing exists until the GM says so. So if you're clever, you only have to include details here and there that really build the tone, that really build the mood that you're going for. And when it comes to injecting hardcore details into a game, there's one thing that's going to come up a lot, and that's the pain. As I mentioned in part 1 in making combat brutal, fighting hurts. Even if you're winning, it's gonna hurt. And so to feed into this philosophy while also letting the dice play a bigger part in the storytelling, I use a little known mechanic called exploding dice. Now, a few different games use exploding dice. However, I got this idea from Earth Dawn, which I highly recommend to anybody looking for a very interesting experience and one that has some really cool mechanics. Maybe I'll do a review of this someday if you guys want that. However, exploding dice just simply means that when you roll the max value of a die, you get to re-roll it again and add that value to the original roll. This means that a dagger in my game is capable of doing as little as 3 damage, but I've also seen a dagger do over 25 damage as the player continues to roll 4 after 4 after 4 after 4 after 4. And these moments allow the dice to basically take over. And when these massive explosions happen, that's when I ask the player to describe how the hell did you deal so much damage. Describe to me some sort of cinematic combat move. Then they can say what they want to say, and then I roll with it. If this were a video game, then that moment kind of acts as like that, you know, mid-combat cinematic sort of quick time event. It's going to allow your players to feel badass, and they don't even have to kill the foe to feel this feeling. Exploding damage also leads to this bizarre situation in my games, which is just kind of interesting, where the players will want to use weapons with lower damage dice. So if you use this mechanic, you might even allow your players to find Mastercrafted versions of weapons, where in my game, you know, a rapier does 1d8, a Mastercrafted rapier does 2d4 though instead. You know, that's going to raise the minimum damage but also increase the chances of explosion. So that 2d4, that's something that the players are really going to want. But note that NPCs are capable of this too. They can roll these massive hits and it gets tense. I love to implement this mechanic with the intention of basically making the players hang on every single dice roll. If the combat is going to feel hardcore, then there must be as little idle time as possible for the players, not the characters, but for the players. I will do basically anything that it takes to make the players sit up and take note of what the dice are doing. And nothing is more terrifying to my players than when an enemy lands an attack and then I just keep on rolling dice. They make that hit and I'm like, oh, and then I'm rolling and I'm rolling, and I'm rolling. My players are just like, oh no, you know, and the faces that they make and the tension that's felt at the table is a moment that all of my players have learned to both simultaneously love and dread. And when it comes to these kinds of tips, if this sort of gaming deep dive and these sort of GM advice videos are what you want to see from this channel, then please do like and subscribe and consider joining the Patreon. You know, I make a little bit of content for my patrons every month just to say thank you. And you also will get shouted out on the video as well and get to speak to me behind the scenes to kind of dictate the kind of content that I'm going to come out with in the future. So if you like what you see, and only if you like what you see, do like, do subscribe, and let me know in the comments what kind of content you would like to see in the future. And so moving on. When we're talking about pain and we're talking about exploding dice, that is a way to make even a small foe, even a weak enemy, suddenly just turn up and land a lucky strike and just do a lot of damage all at once. This is going to keep the tension high and make combat always scary. Even if you're fighting an enemy that only does 1d4 damage, you're gonna know that in a way that makes them a little bit more dangerous than they would be otherwise. And sidebar, when it comes to these brutal hits that your characters are executing or taking, and it comes to them fighting, moving through all of these spaces, you know, fighting in the streets, fighting in the house, you know, fighting in a car and all this other stuff, try to always keep in mind how other people in the environment are going to act to that. Just NPCs should always be everywhere. You know, when they're out and about time, there should just be hundreds of people out everywhere because that's how it is in real life. So try to keep in mind how innocent bystanders are going to react to witnessing these amazing fights or these, you know, displays of strong magic or these incredible acts of violence, because NPCs are a part of the environment. And even if it's just as simple as describing the crowd seeing some crazy shit and it's everybody just scattering in random directions, that still goes a long way toward reminding the players that they are in a world that's inhabited by other people, that the world is their oyster, but it's not only their playground to run around in. NPCs may cry, you know, some of them may run away, some of them may freeze, some of them may even come to the fight to help the players, or they might even perceive the players as the bad guys in that situation from their perspective and come to fight against the PCs. Always be keeping in mind how you can make the environment react in a realistic way, because that will make your game much more hardcore. So when we talk about pain, we talk about taking these massive hits, one thing that's going to inevitably come up: injuries. Now, you know, if you've been playing 5e for a while, then you're going to know that D&D is not a cool enough game to have critical hit charts or anything like that. But it is a necessity for hardcore combat, man. You can't get around that. The two deadliest systems I have ever played, which are DCC and Cyberpunk, those both have crit charts and they're absolutely brutal. Now for D&D, adding a critical system really is as simple as just ripping the critical charts found in Dungeon Crawl Classics. DCC is a D&D clone and is basically compatible with 5e. So the most minor tweaks are all you're going to need to make any system work, seriously. So if you want to roll those brutal crits and you want to add some narrative flavor to those big nat 20 moments, then I definitely recommend getting Dungeon Crawl Classics. And you don't have to spend money on a book like this. The starter rules are like $10, I think, and they do have the crit charts in them. And I can't overstate how amazing these charts really are, and you should definitely give them a chance if you want to make your D&D combats grittier, even if you're just running them raw. However, if you're on the market for something a little bit more radical, and you really want to hack D&D, then I've developed my own system, which I based on Sekiro. Now I'm going to give my patrons an actual look at the real system, but for you guys I'm going to give you an overview. Essentially in Sekiro, they don't have health bars, they have what's called posture, and once you get a opponent's posture all the way down, it makes them vulnerable for a single killing strike. So using this take on the system, I use HP, but only as a gauge for like stamina. It's basically showing how much energy that the player is using when they fight. So when they take damage to their HP, it's not because they got hit. This actually just represents how much energy or how much gumption that it took to avoid injury. When HP reaches 0 though, that's when things get fun. Because in this system, being knocked down to 0 HP doesn't knock you out, it doesn't knock you down, you don't get knocked off your feet, you simply gain the lightly wounded condition. However, This also means that you're all out of stamina, and 0 HP means that you are not able to defend yourself. You just don't have it in you to keep fighting at the level that you were before. And when you get hit with 0 HP, that's when you start to fill in your death saves. And the amount of damage that you take, you know, how many death saves you fill in, that's going to be determined by the class of weapon that hits you. Like martial weapons hit slightly harder than simple weapons, and so on and so forth. When you are reduced to 0 HP, you're mildly wounded. With 1 death save filled in, you're moderately wounded. 2 death saves filled in, you're severely wounded. 3 death saves filled in, no other dice are rolled, you're dead. Now, the actual conditions of being injured, you know, lightly wounded, moderately wounded, they come with debuffs or penalties that match that. You know, some of them are numerical. However, there's also an option, and I would suggest that you sort of even tailor these injuries to what's actually happening in there. Like they got hit in the leg, and that's what caused them to be moderately wounded. Then if you apply a wound to them, then it should probably penalize, you know, movement speed. And again, how I exactly do it, I would be sharing that system with my patrons. But I do think that this is something that every GM should try to implement. Again, if you don't want to make your own system, then I would suggest using the critical charts in DCC, or you can use the ideas that I'm presenting here and sort of build your own system from that. And I like this stamina system for 3 reasons. Number 1 is it's immersive. When you get hit in the back of the head with a pipe, let's say, you should feel that even after the fight. And these injuries do linger till they get medical attention, so that's going to make every fight feel consequential. And I talk about this in my first video, so go ahead and watch that for a more detailed description. 2, it gets rid of the whole whack-a-mole issue that you find in games that have magical healing. If death saves serve as your actual HP, so to speak, and you don't actually get knocked out until you're dead, then you don't have players popping up and down, and healing word can't actually unfill death saves, nor can it remove negative conditions on a player. So minor healing spells will no longer rob combat encounters of their attention. 3, this makes it so that magic isn't like the end-all be-all. There's still a need for doctors and other medical professionals in a world where magic serves more like a band-aid than a cure-all. Because magic can restore your HP or your stamina in the system, but death saves require rest to restore, and injuries require medical treatment with the medicine skill. So if you are trying to use only magical healing, it's only so much that it can actually really help you, and that helps kind of with the verisimilitude of the world building, which D&D just kind of skims over usually. Now, the most important thing, which is again something I talked about in part 1, is that these injuries must linger. Suffice to say, if you're going to bother putting an injury on a player, then it needs to be consequential. It needs to hurt. Worse than Drake's feelings were hurt this past Grammy night. Sidebar. Even when I don't use the stamina system, because I don't always, it's only really for my campaigns where I want the combat to feel more like gritty, more tactical. Some of my more medieval settings, I would use this. But it is still something that I like to consider with my big boss, is that once they get reduced to 0 HP, instead of dying, they enter a sort of broken state. In this state, they're completely worn down. They're out of gas. They're doing all that they can do to fight, but really they're sloppy and exposed, and there's not only so much they can do to defend themselves at this point after they've been beaten down. In this moment, I'll tell my players something like, after he deflects your final blow, expending the rest of his energy, he sags, both hands on his sword. His perfect defense, broken. And when players hear broken, they freak the fuck out because they know then the very next blow is going to kill this boss. And again, everyone's on the edge of their chair now. Everyone's looking at everybody else's dice rolls, eager to see who is going to land that final blow. And this is yet another one of the mechanics that I like to implement that bring the player's attention back to the dice, that sets up tension and anticipation, that constant sort of being on the edge of your seat in these little moments. That makes your game feel much more hardcore and much more high octane. And then when the players land that killing blow, the whole table rejoices. Everyone goes apeshit. Yeah, you know, caps get thrown in the air. The player gets to then describe literally any execution that makes logical sense, you know, within the world. Anything they can think of. And I will literally just roll with it. This lets the players feel badass. And it's going to be the cherry on the top of that really tough boss fight. Because if you're fighting one of my bosses, yeah, it's going to be a tough fight. It's going to be really tough. So I try to award my players accordingly. And this method of sort of letting them make their character a canonical badass, like letting their final execution be something that happens canon in the story, that's actually really nothing short of a GM bribe. I'm bribing my players, you know, like, please don't be mad, please keep playing my game. But it works, you know, it works. Now the next thing is not going to be anything systematic, but this is an even more, I guess, simple and maybe straightforward way to make your game feel more hardcore. And that's to sprinkle in a little bit or a lot of adult content. Setting your scene against a backdrop of seedy activity like a whorehouse or a drug den, or putting your scenes in a location that children are banned from, such as a strip club or a casino, is really going to add to the adult mood and theme. Because the fact is, if you're running a game and you don't mind your 14, 15-year-olds sitting in on it, listening to it, or if it's something that your kids can be around, I hate to break it to you, but your game is not hardcore. And having an adult backdrop does make it easier to inject other adult content, because that will mesh well and you won't likely have a tone that conflicts with your content. And I can't stress enough how much nudity and sexual content elevates stories for adults, because I mean, we're all grown here. We all know what grown folk like to get up to.
Hi, I'm a fucking car, baby.
Lexus convertible.
And this will make your game more relatable, make it more grounded. And a lot of times, I have to say, it'll make it funnier too. But that's not the only adult content that you should be ratcheting up, because in a TTRPG, players should always be able to see notable reactions from the world from the actions that they take. You know, they take action and then there's a reaction. So when your players get that crazy exploding dice moment and they're throwing people through, you know, buildings and stuff and causing a bunch of injuries and they're moving all through the environment, that is when it's time for you to punch up the brutality of the combat and give straight in to the gore. Whenever somebody gets killed or dies, you have your player describe how they do that kill, and then you follow up with a visceral description. If your player says something like, I drive my axe into his brain and kick him down the stairs and his head splits open, that's great. Then you follow up with, as you remove your axe, you tear some of the extra bone free with a spray of blood and brain matter. One of the eyes pops out with the squelch as the man falls into the darkness. And you'll notice that as things get more gory, that's too one of those types of weird where things start to get weirdly, darkly humorous. But that is going to, ironically enough, make the feeling of the combat that much more gritty, because there is a sort of macabre humor that sometimes emerges from violence. And showing that in your game is going to make it be much more hardcore. Now, when it comes to being gory, you don't have to overdo it. Don't, oh, blood is pouring out of his face and his insides are split. Like, you can go there if you want to, but you don't have to. You just got to focus on one or two sensory things that are happening. And I say sensory, like, how does the player feel? You're not going to only describe what things look like, but you're going to describe stuff like the impact of the blow and how it travels up the arm. You're going to focus on the sickly, sweet smell of blood iron that floods their sinuses when they pull the axe out of the brain. You're going to talk about crimson splashing on their hands, becoming cold and tacky on contact. These kinds of elements go a long way toward making your players really feel like they're really killing real people, which, as dark as it sounds, will actually make the game feel much more fun. What can I say? People are going to people. But eventually, there's only so much pain, there's only so much injury, there's only so much gore and violence and adult content that you could really shove into the game before somebody, somewhere, unfortunately, has to deal with death. Fair warning, if you try to implement the rules from my first video and the philosophies from this second video in your game, some of your PCs might die, and a whole lot of NPCs are definitely gonna die. So how you deal with death, especially player death, people have released dozens of videos online about the topic. Maybe I'll do my own video one day, I don't know, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it simple and just say, yeah, death is probably going to happen. Be frank about it in session 0, because there's no point in putting these heroes in life and limb risking situations if they're not actually risking life and literally limb in Cyberpunk. So if death happens, then it happens. Just like in real life, you want to be respectful about it as the GM. I mean, of course. And lots of GMs have great tips on how to give your players their final hurrah if their character dies. I suggest go watching one of those videos. But here, I'm here to tell you how to make death hardcore in your games. And so this is what I do. 1, make it permanent. Your character goes down, they're down. Can you resurrect your character? No. 2. Make it quick. When life finally does leave a character, give a brief description and then move on, because it is to be expected. And the players are going to notice the callous way the death is presented. That's to say that you screw you to the character or to the player. Not saying that. I'm just saying it's not something that you linger on. There's no violins playing. There's no long drawn out scene. They died. Now it's the next player's turn. Give that player a moment to grieve if they need to, and then tell them to start rolling up a new character. Your players will notice that vibe, and the whole table will just be like, damn, that was brutal. And now the fight that they're in will become that much more serious to them, I assure you. 3, make it accidental, If your world is truly hardcore, then death is going to be kind of easy to come by. If players are fighting in the crowd and they roll a nat 1, have them shoot an innocent bystander. Have the bad guys lob grenades and fireballs at the party while they're in crowds of other people. Even if they get out of the way, everybody's not going to. So show that death is easy to come by, even if the PCs are not the ones who are dying. Especially if innocent bystanders are being killed because the players themselves are acting foolishly or recklessly or just rolling really badly. That is going to add weight and tension and a sense of scale, but also a moral quandary, especially for those good aligned characters who are going to have a moral conundrum if they accidentally kill somebody while trying to fight one of the bad guys. Sidebar. And this next bit contains a huge spoiler, so if you plan on watching this movie, skip ahead to this timestamp. Now the video is resuming in 3, 2, 1. I just wanted to take note that one of the side characters in this movie has like a bunch of bodies that he hops into with a bunch of different personalities, and they go out in his place. And when they die in combat, another one just shows up. But I just wanted to point out that this is kind of a cool narrative way to circumvent death, like in a campaign. Like a player that essentially, even you could use this for your players, like they could die and remake the same character essentially, but it's like a clone with a completely different personality. Like they can't be the same person at all, but they can kind of still play the same character. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of fun idea, and I wanted to point it out. Sidebar. And when it comes to accidental death, allowing the environment to kill people or allowing people to accidentally kill themselves is something that will make your combat feel way more hardcore. Like, for example, I was running a gunfight in Cyberpunk. One of the characters was taking cover behind a car, and the NPC ran out in the street to get a better shot to shoot them. They rolled some critical failures, ended up getting struck by a car, instantly killing them, causing their body to like fly across the scene. And it was a huge, oh my God moment for my players, because it just came literally out of nowhere. And that automatically made the scene way more hardcore, but even more direct than that. You should be allowing your players to use the environment in a fight. Push things over, knock things down, cause environmental hazards like fires or electrical outbursts like that help them kill the enemy. That's going to make your world feel more alive, which I talk about in my first video, so go check that one out for a more detailed description. But with all of this constant action, back and forth, death, sex, violence, injuries, pain, movement, but all of this constant action, it's important to remember that too much of anything is a bad thing, including this. If you're always going, eventually the adrenaline is going to start to fade. And just like violence in real life, your players are going to start to get desensitized to this pace of action. So the next point is really the other shoe dropping, because none of these other techniques are going to be as effective if you do not allow your players a chance to breathe. Take a little time. Now, I like to implement this in a few ways. 1, pauses in combat. At this time, the fight isn't over and the player isn't safe. They still have incoming or maybe there's still danger in the environment. Just because they aren't being actively targeted by anything dangerous doesn't mean that they're not still in danger. So pauses in combat can happen if, like, say, all of the bad guys in the area are dead. However, more reinforcements are coming. Or it could even happen like in a pause in combat where the villain starts some monologue for a couple of minutes. The combat's no longer happening. At that point, you can allow the player to make a couple of checks to reevaluate the situation or to try something else. Or if reinforcements are coming, then they can try to get better position or quickly patch your wound or try to get an advantage in the situation that's coming up next. Number 2, punctuate your fight with some sort of skill challenge. Having a skill challenge in the middle of the fight, having it where like, you know, the environment starts to collapse and there's a skill challenge to avoid the damage, or there's a chase in the middle or an escape sort of in the middle of the fight. That is a great way to take a break from combat properly while still keeping the action levels and the tension at their absolute peak. And it's also a great way to transition from combat to combat while staying within the same scene even. And 3, pauses between scenes. And in a good plot, there's always going to be urgency. There's always going to be reasons for the players to keep pushing forward. But you can't just keep whirling away at your players, combat after combat, chase after dungeon after chase, after fight, after boss fight, after mini boss fight. Like, that's eventually going to become tedious. And it's the pauses where the players can take a little time, craft something, go shopping, you know, speak to all of their NPCs, try to get more relevant information, maybe do a little research. It's going to be these times where they can actually take, you know, 5 to 7 days off. That is going to make the rest of how brutal your campaign is. That's going to make that much more poignant because they're going to have that contrast, the quiet versus the extremely loud. So you gotta stretch these moments out, trying to let them rest in between jabbing them in the face with hardcore action, or in the words of great Frollo.
Stop. Sir? Ease up. Wait between lashes. Otherwise, the old sting will dull him to the new.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the trick is really to go hard at every other time, like max level. And that way your players come to appreciate the little moments of respite that they do get, because they're going to need those moments to recover for the situation that I'm going to put them in next. And my favorite kind of combat scenario is the "aw shit" scenario. Because when players see what they're going to come up against, that's all they're going to be able to say. I also call this the impossible fight. If you want your game to feel hardcore, then it is imperative that you put the players up against fights they absolutely cannot win without thinking smart, thinking outside the box. In this way, they're not going to be relying on their godlike magic or their amazing powers as much as their skill as a player. They're relying on tactics. They're using their character sheet as a tool, but not as a crutch. Most players will have a tendency of over-relying on their abilities on their character sheet, to the point where I've had players be like, oh yeah, I just can't do anything. I don't have the skill for that. And they they stop thinking about the fact that they can try anything. It's a tabletop RPG. So having an enemy that just straight up can't take damage by traditional means, or basically has so much HP that hitting them is kind of just a waste of time, yeah, that's going to force your players to think about the broader implications of the combat, like what's happening and what can I do besides just hitting this guy. Because combat isn't always about attacking your enemy. It's about outsmarting them, outwitting them, you know, maybe causing them to injure themselves in some way. A great master once referred to this as the art of fighting without fighting. Enforcing situations where players have to either think outside the box or flee reminds them that no matter how strong, no matter how tough, no matter how godlike your character gets, the mind is still the most powerful muscle. More battles are won at the war table, where strategies are decided, than on the battlefield itself. And having a boss that literally cannot be beaten without using the proper strategy, that keeps the players tense, even at high levels, and especially at high levels, because they're going to know what they're capable of defeating. And if they cannot defeat what they're fighting with pure fisticuffs, that automatically elevates that villain to a status or to a realm far outside your average, bad guy. And I have more information on immortal bosses in this video here, where I explain how to make invulnerable enemies that your players can still defeat. But thank you for watching it, guys. That's what I have for you today. Like and subscribe if you did indeed like this video, and please do support the Patreon. As I've said before, I don't make any money off this YouTube channel, so supporting on Patreon would definitely be appreciated. I'm working on setting up some more high-level tiers and getting the Discord up and running, so please do support. I'm also a pro GM running games on startplaying.games. You can find my link in the description below. I run a whole host of games, as you can see back here, and even more than you can see back here. I run so many games. So check me out and let me know in the comments if you would use any of these techniques. Are you interested in my sort of HP as a stamina system? Did you watch my first video? Are any of those tips or techniques helping you in your games? I would love to know what you guys are doing down in the comments below. You know, share what worked for you, what didn't. You never know who your story is going to help. And I hope that this video has helped you, you know, learn some tips and some tricks that you can use to help you ratchet up the tension and the stakes of your table, to adapt on the fly so you can be a little bit better prepared for what your players throw at you, so that you can be like water, you know, ebb and flow with the story and have an absolute blast with your players all together while doing it. But until next time, look after yourselves and each other, and I'll see all of you in the next one.
Empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend.